film was a recommendation by Jim Myers, Kathleen McCluskey, and Holly Ray Garcia. And let me amend that to say Jim Myers, his review was that it was meh. And I might be leaning toward that. The film is Renfield, which was released April 14th of 2023. Chris McKay is the director. It stars Nicholas Hoult as the titular Renfield, Nicolas Cage as Count Dracula, Aquafina as the police officer, Rebecca Quincy, and Ben Schwartz as Ted Lobos, who's a drug dealer. So the first part of the first act I loved. I was all in. It starts with these clips. Well, it starts with Renfield in a support group for, people who are in codependent relationships with narcissistic partners. And that was really cute. And then he goes back to sort of introduce himself, and they bring in clips that are mimics of the Todd Browning 1931 Dracula starring Bela Lugosi. And I loved it. I was so into that. I thought that was fantastic. The clips looked great. Nicolas Cage in that very beginning sort of tried to do the Lugosi accent. He's no Gary Oldman, but he tried to do it. And then later in the film, he didn't have it, but at times it would come back, like when he said Count Dracula. So I wish he had been a little more consistent with his accent, but I really, really loved that beginning. I thought that was a lot of fun. And it sort of was a spoof on the familiar relationship and what Dracula's asking Renfield to do for him. And I really wish the film had been more about that relationship. I know it would have probably been too derivative of what we do in the shadows, and the TV show one with Guillermo and Nandor, but I still was really invested in that part. I liked Aquafina as Rebecca Quincy, and I love the name Quincy being the nod to the source material. She had this really monotone delivery that was fun. I liked the chemistry between Quincy and Renfield. I thought that was fun. But that whole secondary story about the crime family just didn't engage me, and I didn't feel like it gelled well with the rest. And it sort of made it lose that satirical tone that it had. There were some great action scenes, but as a whole, it didn't gel, and I found myself growing really bored with the story. Renfield, for me, would have worked as a very short TV episode of the relationship between Renfield and Dracula. Keep the same actors. They were doing a great job, but just an abbreviated version of that relationship and how codependent it is. Since today's film focused on relationships, and in particular relationships in Dracula, and in particular dysfunctional relationships in Dracula, I'm going to once again give my shameless plea to the movie industry and to fiction writers out there that we don't need to continue the sort of love triangle story. In Dracula, there's actually more than a triangle, in that Lucy has three suitors. So it's a triangle on a triangle on a triangle. And she is involved with Arthur Holmwood, who is part of the aristocratic society. She's also semi-involved with Jonathan Seward, who is a doctor and ends up being Renfield's doctor. And she's also semi-involved with Quincy Morris, who is an American cowboy. And when you look at these men, they each have parts of them that if you blended them together, you'd have one perfect man. There's really good parts to each of them. None of them are perfect. But what I really liked in Dracula was that Bram Stoker developed a really nice friendship between those three men. And the picture I'm showing is the casting from the Francis Ford Coppola version of Dracula. That casting was about as perfect casting as you could get for the three suitors. They're exactly what you would picture in the book. So, my shameless plea is, instead of having in a love triangle picking one partner, or in this case, Lucy picking one of three, why not go for polyamory? In the instance of Dracula, it probably would have worked very well and been highly successful, as all of these characters communicated well with each other. They shared goals. They shared a love. And I'm not saying the men would have been involved with each other. They would have all been involved with Lucy, but not romantic with each other. But they desperately loved each other. There was this real bromance going on that I think it could have worked. I don't think anyone would have needed to be excluded. And honestly, I'm just so super bored with the love triangle that could we find other configurations, other romantic configurations for the characters in books and movies to experience?